Okay, that's 25-2. First few slides are a little bit of housekeeping. So for those that are still coming through the digital door, they're not necessarily going to miss anything. So welcome to the webinar on delivering resilience, the Comrie Flood Protection Scheme, hosted by the CIWEM Scottish Branch and specifically myself. Just as a heads up, if you have any technical issues or need assistance throughout this session, please raise your digital hand, use the chat feature on Zoom and let us know what the problem is and what help might benefit you. If you're having problems accessing Zoom chat, then use the Q&A and use the Q&A facility to put your question to myself as the speaker here. General housekeeping, the webinar event is being recorded. We only put the recordings of our events up on CIWEM website and YouTube when the authors and the speakers provide permission to do so, and as long as there are no copyright issues. And then you can view the past digital series on the CIWEM YouTube channel. If there are any, I've said that bit. So we'll take questions, or I'll take questions at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to put a question or make a comment, please use the Q&A facility. Chat should be for technical issues with Zoom only, and then put the questions into the Q&A. When you're posing your question, please state who you are putting the question to, and we'll obviously pick the name as to who's posted it. 1 hour of CPD attributable to this website, this webinar. However, we don't provide CPD certificates, as this is not CPD accredited training and only applies to CIWEM members. So a brief introduction. I'm Dr. Rick Haynes. I'm chair of the CIWEM Scottish Branch, but I'm also in my day job, flooding manager for Perth and Kinross Council. So this is a little bit of a presentation to do with one of my own home projects, but I'm putting it out through the CIWEM Scottish Branch webinar series. So I see the numbers have stabilized a little bit, so I'm going to move on a little bit. Hopefully the slide move on. I've mentioned that about CIWEM. So CIWEM is there's a slight delay between me changing the slides and you seeing them, so apologies if I start talking about something before it shows on your screen, but it will get there. CIWEM's a Royal Chartered professional body and independent charity with the prime vision of a world in which professionalism and excellence build connections to inspire widespread, impactful water and environmental solutions. That's the website there, and obviously with a web link to see the corporate strategy for those that wish to read into it and are joining relatively new attendants. And if there are any queries or interests over initial memberships and progressing memberships, please have a look at the membership website there. And you'll also find links through the rest of the website to the policy pages. Let me just move on. So as you'll see, we have over 11,000 members covering 57 organizations and universities across 89 nations. It's a community of practitioners and hopefully visionaries, people looking to do things in new and interesting and effective ways, covering things like adaptation and resilience to climate change, enhancing built environment and improving water security. So a broad swathe of areas of interest, both personal and professional, with the general focus of improving water and environmental management for the public as a whole. something that I think would be of interest to a number of people, and these are all listed on the CIWEM website from a policy perspective. Two that I think would be of particular benefit to highlight at the moment: freshwater future. There's a policy report on the website looking at everything from sewage pollution to flood and drought. CIWEM's policy team reviewing how we achieve healthy rivers, lakes and seas and a resilient water system for the people in the UK, with the parliamentary launch that took place back in January of 2024, but it's obviously an ongoing topic. Not a month that goes by without some story in the mainstream press about water quality and water quantity. And obviously, as we move well into December now, and with Storm Bram affecting swathes of Scotland at the minute, I'd highlight Be Flood Ready as a source of guidance and information on property flood resilience, helping homes and businesses and communities to be literally flood ready. CIWEM's community of practice for property flood resilience, further information about the community of practice. Have a look on the Be Flood Ready website. But if you want to find out more about getting more involved, please reach out to Paul Schaffer at CIWEM, and we can provide contact details for that route to become part of the solution. So that's the sort of the more upfront piece. I will step into the webinar, and hopefully you'll start to see the title slide from myself. Delivering Resilience, Comrie Flood Protection Scheme, being constructed right now by Perth and Kinross Council, overseen by my team within the flooding service of the council itself. So the slides will be a mixture of some text and some images, just to illustrate what goes on to deliver one of these large engineering schemes. So it's common to see the finished product, but we're talking about the in process. So just to start with, I thought I'd pull up a quick definition of resilience in the context of a hard engineering flood defence. The terminology in flooding is complex and sometimes can be misunderstood by public and practitioner and policy alike. But in my interpretation of this, we create resilience by providing resistance to the effects of flooding. And we do that at a range of scales in this instance, at the immediate community level by providing direct protection to homes and lives, reducing trauma and flood anxiety. In this instance, you're seeing a large scheme. It's something visible, it's something weighty, and it can play positively to mindsets of those that have been affected. And these things will invariably provide a reduction in property damage, allowing the community as a whole to resume normal life relatively quickly, sometimes instantly. It also plays at the national scale because we have economic productivity. In this instance for Comrie, it's got a large amount of tourism interests. It is a very sort of pretty village in the Perthshire countryside, and that plays to the national economy. These structures will protect transport infrastructure, power infrastructure, the economy and commerce side of things, and the individual businesses will have reach beyond the bounds of, in this case, Comrie. And these things will reduce large amounts of public spend on disaster relief and reconstruction costs that the councils will become involved in. So there are benefits at a range of scales. So Comrie itself for those that are watching and don't know the Scottish countryside, and I say that, to a degree myself, I've been in post 18 months now, so I'm learning a lot of the geography, both in terms of rivers and communities. But Comrie is on the confluence of three watercourses: the Erne, the Lednock, and the Ruchill, the Water of Ruchill, or Ruchill water, depending on how you reference it. This is one of the larger strategic flood protection projects that all local authorities in Scotland are looking to deliver where appropriate. And the council, under the necessary legislation, is a responsible authority. So there are various labels: local authority, flooding authority, but in the Flood Act, we are a responsible authority tasked to promote sustainable water and environmental management. And this is one of the options that is being taken forward. So the flood scheme itself, from the EU Floods Directive transcribed down through the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009, sets various responsibilities for various parties, and that ranges from government down to the individual. So it is, with all legislation, there are good bits and more challenging bits, but the reality is everybody has a part to play in flood risk management. In terms of the local area, this Comrie falls within the Tay local plan district, and the areas of interest are covered within the flood risk management strategies and then into the local flood risk management plans. The strategy initially setting out a high level view as to which communities are perceived to be more at risk of flooding compared to others. And then the local flood risk management plan puts the onus on a collection of local authorities at a catchment scale to refine thoughts, theories, and approaches on what they will be doing to mitigate the impacts of flooding to those various communities. I'll try and step through these quite quickly and we can get to the images at the end. Now, I'm not expecting everybody to read all the detail here. This is an illustration of the action put to Perth and Kinross Council for Comrie in potentially vulnerable area 0814, which is Comrie in this instance, to deliver a flood protection scheme. And this is the sort of distillation of all the national assessment of communities at risk around Scotland, and various standardized structured reporting for what the issue is, who will be involved, are there any related activities, what are the potential impacts, and the relative ranking at a national, local, and LPD scale within a 6-year period. So the Flood Act working within 6-year cycles. So that is done for schemes, studies, natural flood management, surface water, a number of actions under the legislation. So timelines associated with this specific one, and each study and project and scheme is different. But to illustrate the 3 phases of planning, design, and construction, the earliest study that the council has for sensible reference to came from December 2006. Now, studies, there will be a number of studies done for locations that are at risk of flooding, in this case 2006, but there have been more since then. The strategy was published in 2015, the local flood risk management plan in 2016, and then the halfway report, the interim report in 2019, and the cycle 1 final report in 2022. So this was the flood risk management cycle 1 key reporting exercises. We then were moving into the sort of outline design phase, which started with tendering in 2017. Sweco undertook the outline design until 2020. Statutory process for notifications and consultations took over a year from 2020 into the end of 2021, and then moved into detailed design, having done a local authority hearing to consider objections that were lodged to either detail or the wholesale view of whether the scheme was necessary, effective, or appropriate. And after that was addressed, it moved into detailed design phase from 2021 until 2023. Construction, with tender period starting in 2022, there were some advanced works, which I'll show pictures of later, starting in the middle of 2022. The main works, there was an attempt to start in June 2023, but the tendering period for that didn't work out well, so we had to do a second tender exercise in the middle of 2024. That was successful, and as I'll show in the images, the main work started towards the end of 2024 and they are expected to conclude by the end of 2026. Obviously, this is a live project, so October 2026 may be retained or it may move, just as construction projects typically do. The main point of all of those moving markers is to show that this is a very, very long process. From the earliest studies available in 2006 to the end of construction expected at the end of 2026, you're talking the best part of 20 years. Now, some schemes might take less time, some schemes may take more time, some schemes may fail along the way for one reason or another. But for Comrie, we're looking at the best part of 20 years of effort along the way, changing science, changing policy, certainly changing resources and changing contexts generally. So it's not a quick exercise to deliver one of these things. So some key facts for those that don't know the sort of structure of Scottish flood risk management. This is the outline that you should be seeing now is the Tay local plan district in red, with a small orange blob towards the lower end, the lower side of that red boundary, which is Comrie itself. And I'll now move across to zoom in on that potentially vulnerable area, and you should be seeing an illustration of the confluence of the three watercourses, the Erne, the Lednock and the Ruchill, and then the two main urbanised pieces of Comrie and Kinross. And these are the community areas that are mainly at risk of flooding and have been clearly for a number of years. So that's the sort of local geography of where we are intervening. A number of challenges. It is a rural community. We have to be sensitive to balancing infrastructure with cultural and environmental preservation, with historic heritage spaces. You have to be careful with design that it's effective, but also in keeping with what the community wants and needs. And that involves a lot of community engagement. We have both the contractor and also us as client on site daily, engaging with the community through community councils, individually, just providing updates as best we can, adapting things as we go along. So if there are approaches that need to be adjusted, we will do. Let's move on to the next. Come on. So some key facts for the scheme. We're looking at best part of 3 kilometres of new defences, mostly walls and embankments. Best part of 190 properties, both residential and business. better protected after we finished. According to the assessments, we're looking at more than £41 million worth of future flood damages avoided, and we are doing so by constructing to the 0.5% AEP, or the 200-year standard of protection. Obviously, that's a different metric in Scotland compared to down in England, where traditionally the standards of protection and the assessment from a planning perspective as well is on the 100-year. Designer, we appointed Sweco to be designer, and they are still providing input as we go through construction. Balfour Beatty were appointed through the SCAPE framework with their early contractor involvement starting in 2021, and then providing the advanced works to the tune of 1.3 million over 2022-23 before getting into the meat of the contract, the construction contract over 24 to 26 at the best part of £27 million. So that gives you an idea of the sort of numbers associated before it all started, and the illustration is to show, a little bit of the difference between sheet pile walls and earthwork bunds to protect the communities on both sides of the watercourse. Like I said at the beginning, pre-construction, we did have objections, and the statutory process requires us to consider all objections, whether it is 200 or 2,000. We have to consider them all equally, and that was dealt with through the local authority hearing. It's a long process to go through this, and it can stress communities when they know things are being considered and progressed, but we have to go through the process. And that involves getting through procurement and early contractor engagement in a challenging economic climate. It is never a straightforward exercise to appoint contractors, especially on big schemes like this. So we've learnt that maximising the early contractor involvement has a benefit on the procurement and pushing the project. So there's multiple benefits involved in this. So key challenges from the construction perspective, we did do some advanced works to de-risk the project as a whole. There was some root wad revetment, so some green bank protection that we needed to do in advance of the mix. The usual utility diversions and some testing works for piling. Obviously, we can have a best endeavours with ground investigations, but there are always surprises that appear on these sort of projects. And then obviously you've got a timing aspect to think about within in-river working. And that's driven predominantly by licensing for certain watercourses. You can't go in certain parts of the year, but also flood events, they come through, and from a safety perspective, you have to react accordingly. Main works, like I said earlier, awarded in 2024 and expected to complete at the end of next year, 24-month programme. We did a soft start to allow the contractor to get involved as best they can early, and also to lessen the impact on the local community. We didn't want to just turn up on a Monday with all the equipment and just start having at the countryside and start building things. We had to work carefully. Things like tree felling, to make sure that it was done sympathetically and with the engagement with the community. And logistics, it's a small historic village. It's not built for the sort of equipment predominantly that we would be bringing to site. So we had to think carefully about how to get equipment around, and constructing an access bridge as well to get across to some of the areas that weren't immediately accessible. If I move on to the next. So hopefully you will start to see some illustrations over the next couple of slides. This is to show effectively that to build some of these sort of larger schemes, you do have to do a little bit of taking away before you can start building back. And in rural, historical heritage type spaces, that can be a bit of a challenge to be negotiated with the community. So along the watercourse in the left-hand image, you see a lot of mature trees, and they provide habitats and ecology benefits to the community. To build a flood scheme in the engineering sense requires space to do it. So a lot of trees had to be cleared, which is what you see on the right-hand image. As part of the project, we're obviously reinstating, or not so much reinstating, we are replanting trees. Obviously not at the same scale. Once they're planted, we can't plant full-size trees, but we are planting back as many trees as we took down in as close a location as is reasonable to the scheme as to where the trees came out. But it doesn't look nice when you've cleared all of those trees to an established community, but it's part of the bigger engagement process and part of the bigger picture of delivering a flood scheme. Let me move on. Next few slides are some illustrations of some of the local works as they're delivered. What you should be seeing now are some initial sections of flood wall going in, and they are both right up next to the watercourse and also some setback. Hidden features, like you see in the illustration with the blue excavator, installing seepage piles to stop the subsurface movement of water behind the scheme. We're trying some of the effective engineering approaches into something sympathetic to the local heritage finish. So we're doing natural stone finishes to what are effectively rebar, concrete, sheet pile, structural walls, and making them look more in keeping. Obviously, they will look very new at the beginning, but they should age. We're also installing some bank erosion protection using local selected stone. That's the lower right-hand image there, and using cofferdams to enable the installation of these very large stones. They're 4 or 5 tons a piece, and there are dozens of them being installed to ensure that while the flood wall on the top keeps the water back, the rate of flow is not eroding the banks in front of the flood walls. So that was some of the initial works, and that's all in one location. It's Strand Road in Comrie, and you can see it on Street View, and go back into the photos and see what it used to look like and what it will do or looks like now. Like I said, we did have to introduce a temporary access bridge to get access to certain bits of the site across Comrie. It's not a small bridge. These are just fairly. These are quite intensive exercises to enable what is effectively a flood wall to be constructed and flood embankments, but equipment needed to do the sheet piling work, you couldn't get down to some of the locations using the local tracks and roads. So we had to install a temporary bridge, which will be removed once we are complete, but it shows what needs to be done. The advanced works that I mentioned earlier, we are doing and will consider obviously natural flood management approaches, so saving some of the cleared materials in terms of trees, both locally and from other projects, and then installing them into the bankside to reduce ideally the amount of erosion on the outside of a bend. They don't always work perfectly for the lifetime of when we need them to. So there was some degradation and some scour. So we had to come back and put some rock armour around the root wads, but not using steel and concrete and to stabilise the banks. And in the lower right image, the aerial view of the root wad, that's on the outside of the bend. So there's the grey track in that lower right image is in front of the flood wall. So the erosion protection is to keep the banks where they need to be and not encroach towards the flood scheme. So it's a long-term preservation exercise. Some general activities that go into delivering one of these schemes. Obviously, we've got to get access down the back of people's gardens. So there's been some, negotiation with property owners, multiple property owners, to temporarily curtail their garden usage while we can get in and build the scheme. Though that will obviously be reinstated, and we work with each property owner to deal with reinstatement. What was there. We take a pre-clearance survey of what they had. We engage with them along the way, and then we talk to them towards the end about reinstatement and what they want. We'll also do some transplanting of specimen plants and trees where practicable, obviously. So we're not just turning up and clear felling everything in the way. We'll obviously look to relocate plants of particular significance, either as part of the community or to the individual. And then we've used, along the back of the houses, low noise piling rigs to reduce the stress on the nearby residents over, in that case, May and the summer months. This went through the summer period. And there were noise monitors on site permanently, and there were regular meetings with the residents to ensure that they were kept up to speed with how the piling was progressing, as to how quickly they were going to move on, and also whether there was any damage or negative impacts of the piling experienced from their side of the fence. Obviously, we had to do quite a bit of excavation in certain parts to tie in walls to the higher ground around the properties. So it's fairly invasive, intensive work. But at the same time, we're doing community projects as well. So Legion Park is one of the local play parks. Some of the stones from the bank protection are being repurposed where they wouldn't fit within the works to be part of the play space. We're also taking the opportunity to update and upgrade the play park there as well. So we're trying to do other things than just build embankments and walls. For those with more of a project delivery and management interest, this is just an illustration of the fact that we are in the meat of the project now. We're obviously early December. There's no real detail needed to be pulled out of this, except to say we started at the end of last year and we'll go to the end of next year, and these lines have not moved. These project phases have not moved, so we're in the middle of it all now. That was in terms of time. This in terms of tasks. 14 tasks left, 34 completed. So 71% of the project is completed. There's a lot of clearance and installation of materials. Now it is the fine finishing work and the reinstatement into the end of next year. The key bit to take away from this is obviously the spend profile, which gives an illustration of where most of the spend and effort is going. But broadly speaking, Comrie Flood Protection Scheme runs at about £1 million a month of spend, which to my mind, is not an insignificant amount for a local authority to manage. Over a 2-year period, it's quiet at the beginning, and then there'll be something towards the end. But running at £1 million a month for 2 years is a decent amount of money. And then hopefully this slide will start to work for people. I did trial it just before everything started. These two videos are basically separated by a calendar year. We run drone surveys every month. We use it for project and discussion purposes, but you can start to see where we are building things. We're getting towards where the root bank protection is now, with the flood wall protecting the community on the right and the wall running up the middle. So this is it's basically going all the way around the main community of Dalgin-Ross, with Comrie on the left-hand side of the images. But the walls and embankments thread their way through the communities. It's using the higher ground, tying in where possible. It's trying to make sympathetic flood walls, not adversely affecting heritage structures along the way, and also being mindful of the facilities that you don't see, the utilities that crisscross beneath our feet. The basics of the sheet piling and the walls had to be adapted in a number of locations to allow services that couldn't be relocated to be retained, all the while thinking about the changes of weather in the year, and making sure that the scheme was not going to make things any worse while it was being built, and that we could protect the communities to the best of our abilities without damaging or modifying the scheme while it was being built. So this is getting down towards the downstream extremity of Comrie and Dalgin-Ross, but it's flood walls on both sides, and amenity access is still there. There's footpaths and access throughout. So, like I said, we run these every month, and we're now finding that the use of drones for these large-scale projects is a very valuable tool. It's moved from being what was initially a toy to now being a tool, and it's very useful to be able to illustrate in events like this. So I will just move on briefly. Like I said, we do get flood events at various times of the year, and in this case, midway through construction, what you'll start to see is the sort of dry images where we've got sheet piling, but also where there are gaps in the sheet piling for services. So the contractor, in this case Balfour, have built a flood action plan as part of their construction works, which is to plug these gaps to the best of their ability in advance of a flood event coming in. And you'll see the ton bags. It's as simple as putting ton bags in these instances in the gaps in the sheet pile, and monitoring it and making sure that their equipment is safe and out of the way, and their workforce is brought out of potential harm well in advance. But this was Storm Amy in October, and bar a few minor gaps that couldn't quite be closed up perfectly and the water got round the back, the scheme was not overtopped, although it looked like it was getting quite close in some instances. So we've dealt with flood events mid-construction, and that water came up and it went down, and the construction carried on. And something to bear in mind with the climate variance that we have at the minute, we are dealing with hydrological extremes. So the summer has been very dry. We've had wildfires in Scotland, and obviously low flows. So this was from August. These images are basically covering August. And there were instances where it was possible to, yes.
You've still got the film running on the slideshow.
Okay. I have, in theory, moved on, but I will.
That's better.
Okay. So if everyone is
On to
now seeing
Storm
low
Amy
flow,
now.
sorry, if we're on the low flows image, I'll carry on. Um, yeah, there were times during August where it would be possible in theory, and I wouldn't recommend it. You could walk across from one bank to the other side of the Erne. The water was very low, but as you saw from the previous images, it was entirely possible to get high flows, and that's a variance of a 3 meters or so. I know there are bigger watercourses in the UK, and there are certainly bigger watercourses beyond the UK. But in this instance, midway through construction, it was something to bear in mind that those ton bags needed to be stable. The rolls, the rock rolls that are at the bottom there needed to be secure because should a high flow come through, it's entirely possible that they would be mobilised, and all the equipment and all the resources and people that are trying to install them, and then ultimately the protection of the community, because those materials that move could cause problems by blocking um, bridges, assets elsewhere.
You're still on the Storm Amy slide.
Am I?
Yes.
Okay. Let me see what I can. If I briefly stop sharing, and if I then go back to sharing a screen, Barbara, can you confirm that that's now showing the right screen?
It's now on low flows, August 2025.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Barbara. Right, so to go with all those words I just provided without the illustration, and hopefully to replace the mental images, this is the sort of experience that we had on the Erne in August 2025 in terms of low flows. So quite a variation from Storm Amy to August. Um, it shows the variance that we're dealing with, and for those that we're all familiar with climate and the fact that this is going to be more prevalent and more extreme going forwards. This is the sort of illustration to go with that. Right. Hopefully, moving on to outcomes and legacy. The aim here is obviously to reduce flood risk to a community that has been affected for years, if not longer, decades. Safeguarding, making communities more sustainable, introducing community resilience through protection and additional confidence in structural and non-structural interventions. This is predominantly structural, but others will be non-structural. Providing environmental benefits, using sustainable practices, and I do say that carefully with the context of removing a lot of trees at the beginning, but by reintroducing appropriate trees, considering where there are habitats, otters and the like were spotted on site, so we had to work carefully alongside them and provide a sort of a legacy here for future flood protection schemes in similar contexts. So we are providing feedback to other local authorities as to what our experiences have been in detail and strategic scales for delivering flood schemes, because we've all got the same intentions, but we've got different experiences and lessons to provide. So that is sort of these are the key outcomes from the Comrie Flood Scheme, but it's still a work in progress, literally. The expectation is to conclude at the end of next year. So that's a whistle-stop tour of a scheme in build. I think if there are any questions, let me see. I see. Let me go if it's okay, go to the beginning there. And Richard, yes, I was mindful of our chats about terminology offline, and also, yeah, resistance and robustness to the recovery resilience. It's, have you felt constrained by legislative regulatory standards? Legislative, yes. To a greater or lesser degree, each local authority is by the nature of the legislation and the regulations that go alongside it in competition with other local authorities to deliver because of the funding requirements. It's not easy. These things are not cheap. Authorities do not have all the funds available in-house to deliver. So the process is that we through the assessment side and the design side, go through prioritization, and through, if you're successful through that, Scottish Government would provide up to 80% of the funds to deliver the scheme on the ground. But obviously there's only so much central government funding, and at some point the line is drawn and schemes are put on hold for delivery. So there has to be structure, and there's been changes of structure, and there still will be changes in structure for delivery. That's just part and parcel. Legislation is never perfect from the beginning, so yeah, it's difficult. Were upstream controls sorry, it's just stepped on. Upstream controls considered flooding farmland and moors, or is this already maxed out? The process through here is to start with a long list of actions that could be implemented, and some of them are ruled out very early on as just not being appropriate for that context. Some require a little bit of assessment as to whether they could be delivered, but whether they're going to be effective, and they have to be accounted for in the relatively dry process of benefit cost ratio assessments as to whether, with all of these different pieces put together, it satisfies the regulatory requirements and allows us to get through prioritization to delivery. So in some instances, it might be that flooding farmland is technically achievable, but it will cost too much to deliver for the benefits that will come. So it doesn't always work out as being appropriate to use some of those things. Other schemes and other locations and other contexts, it can change entirely, and it will change. Do the Comrie flood defences affect flood risk downstream? The basic principle is that any effects of any interventions should be neutral or beneficial beyond the extent of the scheme. So the design and modelling exercises will have considered, before my time, I'm not saying that to put any pressure on anyone else, but they will have considered the effects of the scheme both up and stream, from holding water back and also keeping water in the channel rather than onto the floodplains and the properties, and allowing it through. The principle is that it should not adversely affect flood risk. It might positively affect flood risk downstream, but it's part of the design implications. These things step through quite quick. Was carbon impact a consideration of the scheme? Not in the way that I think you're asking, no. There are carbon considerations in terms of both for utilising local resources, both materials and businesses, and that has both a carbon impact and also an economical impact. Obviously, by using local materials, you're not paying for transport costs, and also the additional carbon budget that is needed to transport the materials. And it's the same for resources. If there are local resources, and I mean that in terms of companies and contractors and suppliers, It supports the local community, but it also reduces the carbon impact of bringing in resources and people and equipment from, in its extreme sense, the south coast of England, for example, when there is a more local resource available. So it is considered to a degree, but not in a budgeting sense. I'm guessing there. What has been the biggest learning in delivering this scheme so far? How would the same principles learning be used to inspire smaller scale schemes? Yeah, I mean, this is a scale of it, suitable to the community. You just have to look over towards the likes of Grangemouth and Falkirk and think about a much bigger scheme. There will be smaller schemes. There are certainly smaller schemes in the Perth and Kinross area. The biggest learning here is, I think if I'd asked the project team, they would say similar. Being on the same page as the contractor, because they will have had experiences from elsewhere that can be brought to bear here. They are the front face of the council in this case in delivering the construction of the scheme on the ground. They will be the ones that receive the questions and challenges face to face quite often, and working with them and being on the same page as them has brought great benefits to the delivery of the scheme. We're a year in. We are less than a month delayed so far in terms of the delivery, and given the complexity of the scheme, I think that is, a lot of that lack of delay is down to the positive working environment between client and contractor in this case. Obviously, when we conclude the construction, we'll do a wash up, and the lessons learned will be across the whole project, both from procurement and design side all the way through to the tail end delivery, and pulling out the lessons from that, hopefully to assist others and also other projects in-house, will be useful. Miguel, hello. Based on your experience, how can the very lengthy time taken to deliver these schemes be shortened? From my side, it might come across as a bit of a broken record, but getting adequate funding to deliver these things, because this is one project. We have multiple other projects sat on the shelves and in various stages of design that we want to deliver, but the funding is not available to deliver them all. And I say that as one local authority, but there are two of us all in. Not everything can get built. I think the funding is a big thing. The process to delivery is not the cleanest thing in the world. I mean, we've got 6-year cycles. We're in cycle 2 at the minute. We're already talking about cycle 3, and there's going to be likely some changes in the process as we go forward. I think from a local authority perspective, there's that traditional that traditional almost battle between the private sector and the public sector for resources. There's not a lot of local authority specialists in the flooding realm, and that, being the client, makes it difficult to take on as many projects as you need to take on to deliver for the communities. There are instances where a council can almost grind to a halt in delivering these things, even if they have the money, because they don't have the resource internally. And that comes down to that traditional, dance between public and private sector, and getting people to come and take a chance on working with public sector. And I've done that. I've done both. I've been private and public, and I am where I am. So those two things, having suitable resources internal to the council to drive these projects forwards, and also the suitable amount of funding to actually deliver them, are the two biggest things. with the scheme taking nearly 20 years, has the modelling and hydrology been updated throughout, and is the scheme still being built to a standard of protection of 1 in 200 years? Yes. It's the 1 in 200 year magnitude event of the day. Obviously, as you're suggesting, with hydrology changing due to climate change, the 1 in 200 year magnitude event in 5 years' time, 10 years' time is going to be different to the 1 in 200 year event that we're using at the moment. There are considerations for freeboard built in, and managed adaptive approaches can be incorporated. The other scheme the existing scheme that I have in Perth, the foundations for that are such that the scheme in Perth can be uplifted in height, built higher by up to 500 mil. So you can account for changes in climate going forward to a point, but with all engineered schemes, there are limits to what you can do before you just have to go, we can't build that any bigger. But by the same token, you have to draw the line and stop going around the loop of updating things like hydrology and modelling, because the modelling also takes account of the receptors. Through development, if there are new houses being built in communities, you've got to consider more properties at risk, or potentially more properties at risk. Ideally, they won't be placed at risk, but that's a whole different conversation about planning versus flooding. So yes, you account for as much as you can to the point that you have to stop and just move to the next stage and do a design and deliver. Otherwise, the community remains at risk. So yeah, we try. I think I've run out of questions, which is awesome. I will just step through. If there's no more questions, I will just move through to another couple of tail end slides to talk about some events, CIWEM events that are coming up. And these are both a mixture of in-person and online. So have a look at the events page on CIWEM. Got the Flood and Coast Conference in Liverpool in person. There are tickets available for that. And there's a call for papers which closes midway through January. So if you have a particular topic of interest that you want to put a paper in for that event for, and Christmas is giving you some free time, please consider that. In a couple of days' time, the 11th of December, there's a health and safety, CIWEM branch health and safety webinar for CIWEM Northern Ireland. And again, mid-January, biosolid management using nature-based solutions. If that's your thing and is of interest, please feel free to sign up to that one. And then be flood ready in mid-January, CIWEM's community of practice for PFR action plan for being flood ready. There's a webinar free to attend, of course. And then in March, Rivers and Coastal Technical Conference. It's another in-person conference down in London. So one in person in Liverpool in the summer, and then earlier in the spring, you've got the in-person in London. So there's quite a range of events. And in terms of the Scottish branch, we are currently working up our 2026 event calendar. We appreciate we've been quiet for a while, and we are thankful that you're interested enough to come along, and we'll look to deliver more and do better for 2026. In terms of some training, learning and development, CIWEM have their training page, so please go along to have a look at that one, see if there's any of interest. And then obviously the policy page that I mentioned at the beginning. Finally, publications, Journal Flood Risk Management, Water Environment Journal, and the Environment Magazine. So there's a number of areas where you can get updates on projects, or if you wish to submit something, please look at the routes to do that if you have a particularly interesting topic. So that brings us neatly to the end. So thank you for attending. And I see there's still 54 people there, so I hope I haven't driven people from their lunch too soon. If there are any questions, please reach out for this project via the Perth and Kinross page. But if there's anything else, I'm happy to just let us know. But yeah, thank you. I'll stop sharing as well.